Huh. That's weird. As I'm getting this ready, even though I know I'm going to talk about the questions, what did we finish yesterday? Did we get to Pocahontas? Friday. Did we get to Pocahontas?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so question 2, why did they bring Africans? What was the advantage for the plantation owners? Obviously not the Africans who were enslaved, yes?
Because the Africans were stripped of their environment and their culture, while just the natives were so they sort of had the environment.
Yeah, they didn't know the land, they didn't know the area, they couldn't speak the language. They just got done with the Middle Passage. And so they were totally just broken. And so they were already, they'd been broken, they'd been beaten, so they couldn't run away. Yeah.
It also mentioned how bad a lot of the African tribes and everything were very communal, and then so being stripped away from that, they felt very helpless, and then like everything with the Middle Passage and everything, they were just like felt completely helpless.
Yeah, that communal lifestyle was totally blown up, and so that in a way allowed for the masters to take to control. Yeah, that's really made a difference. And also, there's one thing. There's some skills like they grow rice here, grow rice in South Carolina. So those skills did transfer, but so they could coerce them, literally beat them to do the work. Any others? Yeah.
Wasn't it also because they couldn't enslave the Indians because they outnumbered the settlers?
Yeah, either that or they also knew the land too, they could run away. So exactly right. The Americans were there, they have all those advantages. So yeah, as many as they tried to enslave, they could run away. But so many people were enslaved in this area here, American Indians, and then took to Virginia, forced to Virginia or Maryland. And there's a major tribe here called the Pawnees. That became synonymous with slavery, the Pawnee. So in the 1800s, if you said there's Pawnee in the United States of America, that would have meant this folks. So they did actually slave a lot of American Indians because of the power. And how did they drive a wedge? That wedge, yeah.
They gave the indentured servants rights, more rights than they did.
A few more rights. Yeah, so there's that big difference. A few more rights. And one important thing about it, yes, of course, people obviously knew color of skin, but that had nothing to do with it. Why they gave indentured servants rights was another reason. Why they allowed them to have a few more rights. But it seemed to have something to do with some people with certain color of skin got rights and some people didn't. That's coming. And it would change everything. It happened in colonial America. So it's coming. Long before there was the United States. About 100 years before, almost exactly. All right, make sure your name is on it. Also put your period on it. I will collect these and give you name. So it's not people just saying that. And I do want you to kind of skim through chapter 1. Hand them up. Hand them up and I will get them. Very good, very good. Wonderful. Pen or pencil, if you do use a pen, make sure it's blue or black. I'm getting old, any different color. I don't see as well. All right, these look good. Hey, did you guys know you have the iReady test tomorrow? So we were going to have a regular class day, but I'm thinking about just doing a standardized test because you guys are already be in a rhythm for testing. Think that's a good idea? No? All right. Okay, so we got to Pocahontas. Let's go and take your notes out. Let's go and finish that. So we're going to, while I'm doing that, 2 things I'm going to hand out. First, put it in the loop here. How did I not have one of these? Yeah. That matters.
Put me on. Like he thinks you're hot. I literally might be discussing it.
And by the way, as me getting this flamingo, this is the honors class. Oh, and I'm filming this. Are you guys excited? Oh! Yeah, wow, was right. Let's see, let's see. Let's see. Oh! This is how you change lives. Pick this up. It's too distracting. Okay. No, I won't leave it on. All right. They got lots of batteries in it. Okay, so on Friday, we talked a little bit about, what happened to American Indians that allowed the English colonists to take over? What happened to them?
Disease.
Yeah, the American Indians, disease just ravished them. Disease destroyed them. They could not recover from that. My microphone. Side by side. That's exciting. Yeah, disease just ravished them. And did I tell you about them shoveling sand into barrels?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. And what kind of company? I'm just kidding. What kind of company? I'll throw this to whoever want to answer. He kind of goes with the rap, doesn't he? Rap. Okay. What kind of company, owned by investors, a London company was one that started Jamestown? What was that? Yeah. Joint stock. Precursor to corporations that come to dominate our life. Corporations, anybody know when corporations would start?
What?
Wouldn't there be the first corporation? 1830 from Belgium, of course. Everyone knew that. You knew it was Belgium, you just didn't know the year, right? The brand new country of Belgium. Okay. John Rolfe, what plant did he,
Tobacco.
Yeah, tobacco. And this addictive drug saved Jamestown. And we talk a little bit of New Spain, conquistadors. So we got Pocahontas, we get the plantations. Is that where we quit? Let's do plantations. So plantations, these large, almost always single crop, you probably know, you've heard of cash crops. Cash crop, this was tobacco cultivation, and the latitude it was on, it grows about this latitude. So keep following this latitude. Like for example, they grow tobacco in Turkey, in Egypt, in India, in that same latitude. But this is the south shore of the James River. Not quite as swampy, but the proper tobacco cultivation in any soil, if it's just intensive tobacco cultivation, and these guys, these plantation owners, they want to get rich as possible. They're all in debt. They're all desperately trying to make money as fast as possible. They didn't grow any other crops. They grew tobacco as much tobacco in these small little plots that the Powhatans or the Mingos or the other tribes there use as quick as possible. Swampy soil, the soil is already pretty sandy. There's not a lot of nutrients in it, so about 3 seasons of tobacco, 3 years, and the soil's leached out of most of its nutrients. So they have to grow something different in the soil. Well, they couldn't. And so the yields went down, and so they needed more land. So where are you going to find land? In the West. Where else are you going to go? It's the West. And so this is going to push them further and further. Okay, the first ones will be up the James River, a couple of spots of what is now Maryland, but they begin to push up. And you can imagine what's going to happen. The Powhatans at first allied themselves with the English because they thought the English were helpless and they wanted aid against their enemies after disease had ravaged them. Now the English are taking their land. And that's going to lead to a series of wars, late the teens into the 1620s, the Powhatan Wars. So these tribes devastated by disease. One sec really quick. Devastated by disease, they formed alliances in these tribes here, and most of these tribes were enemies of the Powhatan. But this became one of those, you've probably heard this saying before, the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. And so they're bitter enemies. For a short time, they fought back against the British, the English settlers. Most of them were English, there were a few Scots. I guess Britain is probably the most proper way to say it after 1604. But the colonists were just right along here. And they did an attack, the Powhatans. They tried to do an attack where they attacked every English settlement, including Jamestown. Now this is going to be sensationalized into this, can you see this, of the Powhatans, massacring all the people there. It wasn't quite like that, but it was a very successful attack. But they really made it, they sensationalized it.
Wait,
Look how brutal and awful the Powhatans are.
Oh.
The English would learn, and this would become their way to attack, the surprise attack. And so when the United States would be trying to conquer that land, that'd be the United States method. Surprise attack.
Isn't it called like guerrilla or something? Or is that something else? Or
It's very similar to that. And that's coming. Guerrillas, we're still about 200 years from that.
Isn't that, yeah, that's during the revolution.
Yeah, exactly right. We'll get to that. And so with that, so the Powhatans won. And this is a picture, another stylized picture of the meeting between basically the English, the Jamestown said, hey, you win. We will isolate ourselves into the southeastern end of this peninsula. You win. And they had a big conference. And here shows this where a number of the leading warriors. Now, American Indian tribes were a lot different than the English, or for that matter, Europeans. Europeans had a very set hierarchy. There's usually one man on top and other men. And then women much lower, almost no rights. The eastern tribes of the United States were not like that. There was no one person. It was much more communal. That's part of the reason why Europeans to this day, people of European descent, they didn't have property. They didn't have the idea of property. It wasn't quite like that. They just didn't have this hierarchy where one or two people owned all the property. So it was just different. But I should add too, women, it wasn't 100% equal, but women had significantly more rights. And for most of these eastern tribes, women made all the big decisions. Men would debate, but they would ask women. That's part of the reason why so many women left the colonies. So part of our problem with this history is it's from the English or then the United States. And what do they want? They want the one man in charge. That's why you have that term chief. It's very misleading because it wasn't one person, but that's what they always look for. So what we have here are the leading male warriors, fighters, just the best fighters. Logical. Homecoming dance is called. That's where they keep all the student councils. See my bird? Here, let me show you this. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else could do it as cool as me. And so they were going to toast this with just a couple glasses of wine, which was a very exotic thing that the English brought to the Americans. And what happened?
They poisoned.
They poisoned the wine. Killed off most of the leading warriors. This devastated the tribe. And who won? The English. And this would become the norm. You read about the Phillips War? They came in the same deal. A peace agreement, the Wampanoags had won, and they ambushed them and murdered. This would become the norm for the English, and then the United States would do this too. And so there's this constant fighting. We mentioned this, but think about moving in, taking land, fighting back, war along the frontier. And this frontier war would go into the 1890s. in some way. Yes.
Do you want this?
I actually already have one. That's my garbage can.
Okay. Do you want a second one?
No.
Okay.
You might know what this is? When this was a fallout shelter in case of nuclear war, they had water. So this would hold 15 gallons of water. This is full. Catch. You can take it home.
Okay.
Mention my
Definitely will.
So, yeah, this one. Yep, see that stretcher? That's from the fallout shelter. That's why I have that there. You see that thing back there with the Viking helmet on there? That's carbohydrate supplement. That is candy in case of nuclear war. So we can live on that. We're safe. My garbage can. The old water thing. I'll show you one more thing since we're on this. Have you seen my life? That's a toilet to get to nuclear war. Desanitation kit. That's it. We didn't have nuclear war, but something happens. And by the way, the whole idea of it is more gross, I think, than you think. And you're probably imagining something pretty horrible. So back here, wine. So all on the frontier, this has happened. Move west, and that is where we get these first colonies. We really do have to mention the Chesapeake colonies. They call them that because Chesapeake Bay, right along here. Maryland would come a little bit later, and all these guys are in debt, but they want to create this planter aristocracy. I told you about how they want to be like these English country gentlemen, live in the same kind of manor houses they had in the countryside of England, but now let's do it here. That's where the big slave, or the big plantation slave homes with the actual slave quarters behind. And they had all this land, but they'd be desperate for labor. They had the claim to land. The claim. Virginia, that company, was given all the land between the latitude between my hands, a little bit bigger than what this is right here, all the way to the Pacific. Not Britain just sailed by and they just did it. And no, they didn't bother to ask anybody who lived there. And they gave, like, for example, all this to New Jersey. They just had all these conflicting land claims just to buy them off. This will be a problem down the road. Well, in Virginia, it's across the Atlantic Ocean. The London Company and then later on the Crown can't really govern. So they govern themselves. They would appoint the company, then the king would appoint a governor, but they had their own colonial legislature, the House of Burgesses. And they did some taxes, some laws. Britain really couldn't control the colonies. They're just too far away. You can't just get on the phone. These are colonial elite. This is the aristocracy. Another name for aristocracy is Burgesses. To this day, the Virginia state legislature is called the House of Burgesses. Now, these are colonial elite. Only a few plantation owners, they're kind of pick themselves. What do you call a government of just a few people? Oligarchy, it's written right here, oligarchy. Just a government of just a few people, and that's all it was. And whose interests were they looking out for? They're everybody's, and everybody's got the same interests of their own. Yeah, they only cared about this tiny little group of landlords, desperate for land, in debt, and desperate for labor. Labor they could control. And whose labor? Most of us would be that labor. And farmers are always in debt. Always. Now, let's be clear, all businesses are always in debt. They might make money today, but then they have to pay for their expenses and hope they can pay back their debt. They're always in debt. This is the United States of America. Everybody's in debt now. But why are farmers so susceptible to debt? Really susceptible. To this day, why it's such a difficult job. Less than 1% of Americans today make their sole income from farming. It's really hard. Why?
There's like a day to start planting your crops and because it's doing well.
Yeah, you got to borrow. Hopefully, you can make enough money that one time you can sell your crop. One bad year. All it takes is one bad year to earn a hole. Thomas Jefferson had land, he had wealth. His biggest source of wealth, anyone know his biggest source of wealth? Humans. There's a massive slaveholder. And so much of his thinking about being a revolution and a patriot was debt. If you're in debt, obviously this thing is hanging over your head all the time. And that's what farmers are like to have, this debt. You gotta get out of it, or you lose everything. That's kind of scary. So, they're all thinking this way. Two things I'll show you about this. First off, this is Williamsburg. Jamestown was a bad place for capital. They eventually moved it upriver. That's the capital of Williamsburg. Has anyone ever been there? It's in Virginia now. It's the National Park Service runs it. If you ever get a chance, go. It's really cool. It's like literally you walk into 1700. They have it all like it was 1700. They have actors who work for the Park Service who all act like it's 1700, talk with the same language. You know, if you go there, you can try to stump them. They're really good. They stick in character. It's really, you walk into this time capsule. So I highly recommend it, but that's Williamsburg. That is a map from the 17th century, Virginia. Which way's north? Yeah, here's north. That's Chesapeake, west, east, south. We're still about another 100 years where they always put maps. The default was north on top. About 100 years from now. It looks really weird for me. I have to kind of turn my head. You know, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I can see the Chesapeake. Here's Jamestown. Here's New York City. Helena way up there. And so this is the legislature. They're kind of left on their own. They have all these problems, and they need workers, and they need labor. And that's where they started looking at slavery. But they also wanted Europeans. They want Englishmen to give them a better claim. They want Europeans. And don't think in color of skin. That's not what they would have thought of yet. Maybe religion, but it was more, and don't think it's citizenship. I will say citizenship, but that concept did not quite exist to our terms yet. But it was more like, if they're Englishmen, they might have a bigger tie. And you can see the old printing press. What letter is that? Best. What letter is that? It's an S. Bloomsbury. The old printing stress. I always want to say Bloomsbury. And that would be the indentured servant. And so let's talk very quickly about slavery. So slavery was be a lot of different types. Indentured servitude is one, but we had slavery. That's part of the reason I read this in, was because of this slavery. And let's be very clear, what kind of people were enslaved? Almost always, it's people who had no other means. They were the lower class, desperately poor, and they had no way to battle back against exploitation. The Africans who were enslaved were almost all debtors, thinking they're paying off their debt. Europeans, indentured servants, were debtors. American Indians were the ones who were enslaved, were usually captured for other reasons, paying off a debt, devastated by disease, but they're all basically exploited. And so this is a relatively free labor. They are going to be machines for their owners. So they're not individual workers, they're machines to try to get as much wealth as possible. Now, this is not the same economy as the United States or most of the world has today. We have a form of economic system that's kind of late capitalist we have now. This is pre-capitalism. Capital are machines. But this is like proto-capitalism. What are the machines? They're machines, which is kind of scary. And I want to be clear about it. Slavery had nothing to do with skin color. There were African slaves, there were Indian slaves, there were Arab slaves, there were slaves of European descent. This was a burgeoning slave market. And so it was very common for the Spanish or the Portuguese to buy slaves from the Balkan Peninsula, which were Slavs. All the time. That's where the term slave comes from, Slavs. And in the English. And so you have this whole variety of people. One thing, though, For Christian Europe, they thought they could enslave heathens, aka non-Christian. We'll enslave them. Now, I think all of you might see the problem. What if they convert? Oh, you might need something else down the road. Of course, they could also say, too late. But they could say heathens. And slavery back then was much more like we see indentured servants. So indentured servants, 7 years, they're free. Well, there was no permanent slavery, what you might be thinking. Slaves, African American Indian slaves, the slaves that came from this internal slave trade here, they were generally given their freedom sometime down the road. And they might be promised land. So the thing would be, we might give you a little something if you don't run away down the road. We'll give you something. And almost certainly their children will not be enslaved. And so that idea of permanent slavery did not exist. It was close to indentured servitude. It was close. Now we have to give it different though, because indentured servants have something that slaves do not have. Oh, where's it at? A contract. I thought I put the word contract. I had in my head a contract. So indentured servants, they sign a contract. 7 years, they get their freedom after 7 years. It sometimes could be 5, it could be 8, but that was generically what it was. And it's got out of order. They would get a head right. That's that 50 years. And head right, it's a very awkward way of saying just my head. That means I'm a person. I get it. It's just me. That's all head right meant. 50 acres of land. They also get passage over to the new world. They're going to be an indentured servant in the new world. They might get, and put like maybe seeds, maybe a few other things they mentioned in Zen. But they have that contract. And that contract is key. Here is a contract. This is somebody from Dublin. And they would print these out on a printing press, and then you fill in the gaps. So this is around the turn of that century. And so you can see the royal seal. This is Ireland, which then was a royal colony of Great Britain. And went through the whole contract. How they'll be paid. There's signs with the F's, it look like F's there. They had this piece of paper. Slaves did not. And why did somebody be willing to go be a slave? Well, first off, before we get to that, before you write down liberty, it goes without saying, clearly they had to be desperately poor and scared. And the big landlords in Britain were kicking off farmers. In the Middle Ages, after the Great Plague, after the Black Death, 14th century, serfdom kind of ended, and what happened was landlords had land, but they let peasants farm the land for a percentage of the crop. Now in the United States, that's going to get a name in the 19th century. Anybody know the name where you give a percentage of your crop as rent to live in that land? Say it again?
A ranch hand?
That is kind of what they do, isn't it? Yeah. But, you want to know? Sharecropping. That's exactly, you might have heard the term sharecropping. That's what they were. Well, in the 17th century, the landlords realized we can make more money by getting rid of the farms and raising sheep. So they kicked them off. And all of a sudden, from these agricultural areas here, you had thousands of people who were facing starvation. They were kicked off their land. What do you do in 1620 if all you've ever been is a farmer, and your family's been a farmer, and now all of a sudden, what do you do? Roll to die. Sometimes they go to the city and live in absolute poverty as a laborer, which is terrifying. Living in hovels or in alleys or wherever in the big, dirty, disgusting cities. Or, my life has no hope. I'm going to go into a tribe. And that's why so many would do it. But there's a reason. After they're done, they thought, finally, I will get a chance to decide my own fate. To decide your own fate, your path, that's called liberty. Now, we are liberty, we probably, all of us, I do too, you probably know the word freedom. Don't you think that liberty's freedom? It's more complex. It's that ability to decide your own fate. And what they said is, they looked at their experience here, and what decides your fate? Land ownership. If I own my land, I'm not beholden to anybody. I'm not beholden to any single person. No one can tell me what to do. Land ownership. And if I don't own land, so I got to work for somebody for something called a wage. It's different than wages today, but close enough. So wage, or be like a sharecropper. Are you free? Can you really decide your fate if you're dependent upon somebody else for your livelihood?
No.
You're a what?
Slave.
They would have said slave. I should add, isn't it amazing how all of us, almost all of us, me and you, think about earning and working for somebody else and getting money, when the formation of the United States, that would be considered a slave. It's amazing how ideas change. I'll tell you how that happened after I help with this. So, liberty. And there's something new. This idea, brand new, that we have rights. Uh-oh, this is going to be bad. Something just bad happened here. Give me a sec. Everybody relax. Okay, write down rights of Englishmen. Everyone's going to have the rights of Englishmen. And this was a whole brand new thing. When the American Revolution happened, the people who revolted against the United States, they were not thinking, or sorry, revolting against Britain. They're not thinking, hey, let's form an independent country. No, they're thinking our rights as Englishmen have been deprived and we must get our rights back. It wasn't a plan for independence per se. All right, we're gonna have to reboot this now. Isn't this fun watching the creating process? So the first 6 months, they literally had the very weird and I find very creepy name. They called it seasoning. Those first 6 months in the New World. Now this is for everybody, but you can imagine indentured servants with the worst food and immediately trying to be put to work. That's first 6 months. We now believe that up to 50% of all the people who came from England to the New World died in the first 6 months. And the same thing happened to slaves. The disease hit them hard. Here they are. They're picking tobacco here. But the big problem was malaria. Malaria was spread across a lot more of what is now the United States back then. What spreads malaria? We know today. What spreads it? They had no idea. They wouldn't know it to the beginning of the 20th century. That's another story for down the road. But malaria, you catch malaria, yes, it can't kill you, but the big thing is it makes you incredibly just lethargic and sick. High fever, you're weak, everything hurts, you can't work. And so they had these people, literally, if they couldn't work, they starved to death. So malaria just was a massive killer. And the other thing was this. Let's say you survive that 6 months of malaria, 8 months of malaria. You might wait another 8 or 9 years and get it again. Like a bad joke, it comes back. And so, malaria. So malaria devastated these indentured servants. Devastated the African too, but it's a little bit different. The African slave, a little bit different. So the first African slaves, 1619 is the year they always give. Now, 2 caveats about that. We're pretty sure now that Dutch ships arrived in 1617 with African enslaved people. And also, the Spanish had African slaves in Florida well before Jamestown. So, but it was in 1619. There was already an active African slave trade. The Portuguese just kind of entered this. as they're going around here trying to pay for their trip, they started trading along here. And it avoided the middleman. The slaves were already traded up here to trade with the Ottoman, the Arab, or the Italian traders. They just traded directly to Portugal. And New Spain was desperate. So it just tapped into the slave trade. So basically just went around the old established here, or a very common way would be across here and then up. And then by the 16th century, 17th century, Dutch and then later British traders. Liverpool is going to become one of the richest harbors in the world. That's in Western England. And been to Liverpool. I'm a big Beatles fan. And one of my favorite Beatles songs is a song called Penny Lane. Some of you might know it. It's a great song. If you don't know it, you should know it. But Penny Lane is named after a slave trader. This is actual street. They didn't write the song about it, but this is the spread of malaria right here. And so at that, we're jumping right here. To why Africans? It wasn't just for the reasons you read about it. It's also the disease. There are 2 strains of malaria. Sub-Saharan Africans are less susceptible to one of the 2 strains. That has basically been kind of iced out, that strain they weren't susceptible to. It devastated both of them Europeans, but not Africans. Have you heard of sickle cell anemia?
Yeah, doesn't Africa like have it really, really bad?
And it's sub-Saharan Africa. It seems to be related. The same thing that caused sickle cell anemia was one of the reasons why they were more immune, more resistant to one of the 2 strains of malaria. The strange little quirks. And anemia, meaning the same symptoms, is the same as malaria, so kind of a cruel joke. So you see another reason why they've been more profitable. The seasoning time was short. That's money. That's money. So that's the big reasons why Africans. So now you have Africans, indentured servants, and we're coming to, and then let's get to the next big thing. They're not English citizens. They don't have rights. They don't have a contract. That gives the Jamestown Authority, the House of Burgesses, more power and the master more power. Indentured servants were slaves for 7 years. But they didn't have, but they had a contract down the road. That contract. And that's going to lead to Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion, you have these moving west, constant war. Here is from Bacon's Rebellion. This is about 1650, 1660 along here. They're moving out, moving out, moving out, moving out. There's a wall coming. There's this kind of flat area, mountains. So they're moving up until they run into the mountains. I should add that running into the mountains was one of the big reasons for the Revolutionary War. And remember those headlines. What land are they giving indentured servants?
The land they already used.
Yep, that used up land. And so they're getting rotten land. So you can imagine they won't make it, and so they become laborers getting paid almost nothing, or like sharecroppers. They came there for freedom, and they're going to get the exact opposite. Or they're moving this way. Let's give the indentured servants land way out in the frontier. So when the various tribes fight to keep their land, who do they attack? They attack the indentured servants. That's who they get. They're the ones who are going to be killed. And this kind of weird, and it is close to guerrilla war, with this fight along the frontier as those tribes are desperate to save their land, and yet their numbers are getting, it's now becoming noticeable how much fewer they were. And they had no representation in the House of Burgesses, so they couldn't complain. So Nathaniel Bacon would be a member of the House of Burgesses. He's going to blame the governor, Governor Berkeley. I think I put that in there for no protection along the frontier. And this is what people talk about. The book mentions it. This is not what's important. What's important is this. Bacon, who was along the frontier, was demanding protection from attack. He tapped into all these people who had no representation. All members of the lower class joined. All members. Who was that? indentured servants, all the slaves, laborers, poor farmers just eking out a living on terrible land. They all joined, and color of skin didn't matter. In fact, you notice I put down races? That term wasn't used yet. That term, no, didn't exist yet. This was all created. Now, I'm going to stop right there, but I gave you that packet. Did I give you that? I'm going to give you a packet. I thought about giving you a packet. Actually, I lied. I'm going to give you something else. So let me add one more thing to the notes real quick. Do you know what militia is? Hmm? Yeah, like farmers and laborers, they come together and their part-time job is in the military. What is the example of that in the United States now? Ooh, what's that? National Guard. Man, they're obviously very well trained, but they also have other jobs. Well, these colonies had to have militia. Makes sense, doesn't it? They might get attacked by the Spanish or the French, American Indian attack, or slave rebellion. They sent the militia out to stop this rebellion, and what did the militia do?
They joined.
They joined. And why is that important? The militia joined. Let's skip to that really quick. I know the bell's about ready to ring. Because the militia are the same class. Now, it was fall. The rebellion kind of ended because people had to go back to pick their crops. Bacon died that winter. And so the rebellion ended. But everything would change. The House of Burgesses has got to figure out a way to make sure this never happens again. We read that in Zen, but we get to a little more detail. Now, you got a little bit of homework. I'm going to assign America. That's our main textbook, okay? Page 102 to 126. 102 to 126 for Thursday. So I'm giving you 2 days. Now, I do this in all my classes because it's been a very effective way to do it, so you remember these from last year. Different book, though, obviously. This is actually a list of terms for the first 3 chapters. 3 through 6, 3 through 5. Chapter 4 is like the biggest chapter in the book. There's so much of these chapters I try to narrow it down. So those first pages are about the first 6 or 7 terms on this column. So that's what you need to know from your reading for Thursday. 102 to 126. If I give a quiz on Thursday from the reading, it'll just be from those terms. So if you jot down a few things in your notes for that, you're going to be set.
Wait, this one? These ones?
Yeah.
Just
I
up to
think through the
Empire?
Colonial Rebellion. I think.
Okay.
Hey, these books are, these textbooks are so big, there could be I could have 1,000 things in there. 2. I'm giving 5 in this book. All right. And then tomorrow you have the iReady test. Shortened periods. Sound good? Huh? That's stuff from the chapter, the reading I'm giving you. So it'd be from chapter 3, the first 24 pages.
Okay.
And that's about the first 7 or 8 terms on this list.
It's just like vocab.
Yeah, it's like vocab. But think about in terms of, how everything's going to kind of relate and connect together.
Yeah.
And this is kind of these sort of backgrounds. I can fill in the blanks. Gimme. Beautiful. Have a great day, everybody. Give it to me tomorrow. Yeah. Have a good day, everybody. Oh, I got all the notes ready, except for the ones I just got. I just got to record them, and I'll get that done as soon as possible. Have a good day. See you tomorrow.
I turned in my notes when we ended up on those things, so I think it's in my file.
Oh, in the Zen?
Yeah, because I was gone Friday. So
Oh, okay, I got it. Okay. They're trying to reinflate balloons? Yeah. Give it a try. Huh? You have a hand. Why you got a big plastic bag? That's garbage.
I'm taking the.
Throw to Mr. Larson's class. He loves that kind of stuff. Ah. All right, yeah,
The
you
only
got it.
thing I didn't really, I couldn't really find any common calls.
Yeah, that was.
Okay.
Stop.
Yeah, I didn't really know. I'm like, okay, well, it's online. I'm like, oh, well, looks like I'm going online because I can't.
But one thing you should, you think about this kind of thing. Yeah. So think about that. Try to put them.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of figuring out. Yeah.
I know that's in your mind starting to work out.
Yeah.
We'll see you tomorrow.